We now present A Christmas Tree, written by Charles Dickens. Before the story begins, here is a brief listening guide. Published in 1850, A Christmas Tree is a meditative Christmas essay rather than a conventional novel. Dickens begins with children gathered around a decorated tree, then transforms its branches into a map of memory. Toys, books, theater, scripture, ghost stories, school days, family gatherings, loss, and faith appear as stages of a life. Listen for the movement from bright catalogs to darker recollections, and finally, to a mature affirmation of compassion. Now, let the story begin. I have been looking on this evening at a merry company of children assembled round that pretty German toy, a Christmas tree. The tree was planted in the middle of a great round table and towered high above their heads. It was brilliantly lighted by a multitude of little tapers, and everywhere sparkled and glittered with bright objects. There were rosy-cheeked dolls hiding behind the green leaves. And there were real watches, with movable hands at least, and an endless capacity of being wound up, dangling from innumerable twigs. There were French-polished tables, chairs, bedsteads, wardrobes, 8-day clocks, and various other articles of domestic furniture, wonderfully made in tin at Wolverhampton, perched among the boughs. As if in preparation for some fairy housekeeping, there were jolly, broad-faced little men, much more agreeable in appearance than many real men, and no wonder, for their heads took off and showed them to be full of sugar plums. There were fiddles and drums. There were tambourines, books, work boxes, paint boxes, sweetmeat boxes, peep show boxes, and all kinds of boxes. There were trinkets for the elder girls, far brighter than any grown-up gold and jewels. There were baskets and pincushions in all devices. There were guns, swords, and banners. There were witches standing in enchanted rings of pasteboard to tell fortunes. There were teetotums, humming tops, needle cases, pen wipers, smelling bottles, conversation cards, bouquet holders. Real fruit, made artificially dazzling with gold leaf. Imitation apples, pears, and walnuts, crammed with surprises. In short, as a pretty child before me delightedly whispered to another pretty child, her bosom friend, there was everything and more. This motley collection of odd objects, clustering on the tree like magic fruit, and flashing back the bright looks directed towards it from every side, some of the diamond eyes admiring it were hardly on a level with the table. And a few were languishing in timid wonder on the bosoms of pretty mothers, aunts, and nurses, made a lively realization of the fancies of childhood. And set me thinking how all the trees that grow and all the things that come into existence on the earth have their wild adornments at that well-remembered time. Being now at home again and alone, the only person in the house awake, my thoughts are drawn back by a fascination which I do not care to resist, to my own childhood. I begin to consider what we all remember best upon the branches of the Christmas tree of our own young Christmas days, by which we climbed to real life. Straight, in the middle of the room, cramped in the freedom of its growth by no encircling walls or soon-reached ceiling, a shadowy tree arises, and looking up into the dreamy brightness of its top, for I observe in this tree the singular property that it appears to grow downward towards the earth. I look into my youngest Christmas recollections. All toys at first, I find. Up yonder, among the green holly and red berries, is the tumbler with his hands in his pockets, who wouldn't lie down, but whenever he was put upon the floor, persisted in rolling his fat body about until he rolled himself still, and brought those lobster eyes of his to bear upon me, when I affected to laugh very much, but in my heart of hearts was extremely doubtful of him. Close beside him is that infernal snuff-box, out of which there sprang a demoniacal counselor in a black gown, with an obnoxious head of hair, and a red cloth mouth wide open, who was not to be endured on any terms, but could not be put away either. For he used suddenly, in a highly magnified state, to fly out of mammoth snuff-boxes in dreams when least expected. Nor is the frog with cobbler's wax on his tail far off, for there was no knowing where he wouldn't jump. And when he flew over the candle and came upon one's hand with that spotted back, red on a green ground, he was horrible. The cardboard lady in a blue silk skirt, who was stood up against the candlestick to dance, and whom I see on the same branch, was milder and was beautiful. But I can't say as much for the larger cardboard man, who used to be hung against the wall and pulled by a string. There was a sinister expression in that nose of his. And when he got his legs round his neck, which he very often did, he was ghastly, and not a creature to be alone with. When did that dreadful mask first look at me? Who put it on, and why was I so frightened that the sight of it is an era in my life? It is not a hideous visage in itself. It is even meant to be droll. Why then were its stolid features so intolerable? Surely not because it hid the wearer's face. An apron would have done as much, and though I should have preferred even the apron away, it would not have been absolutely insupportable like the mask. Was it the immovability of the mask? The doll's face was immovable, but I was not afraid of her. Perhaps that fixed and set change coming over a real face infused into my quickened heart some remote suggestion and dread of the universal change that is to come on every face and make it still. Nothing reconciled me to it. No drummers, from whom proceeded a melancholy chirping on the turning of a handle. No regiment of soldiers with a mute band taken out of a box and fitted, one by one, upon a stiff and lazy little set of lazy tongs. No old woman made of wires and a brown paper composition, cutting up a pie for 2 small children, could give me permanent comfort for a long time. Nor was it any satisfaction to be shown the mask and see that it was made of paper, or to have it locked up and be assured that no one wore it. The mere recollection of that fixed face, the mere knowledge of its existence anywhere, was sufficient to awake me in the night, all perspiration and horror, with, "Oh, I know it's coming! Oh, the mask!" I never wondered what the dear old donkey with the panniers, there he is, was made of, then. His hide was real to the touch, I recollect. And the great black horse with the round red spots all over him, the horse that I could even get upon, I never wondered what had brought him to that strange condition. or thought that such a horse was not commonly seen at Newmarket. The 4 horses of no color, next to him, that went into the wagon of cheeses and could be taken out and stabled under the piano, appear to have bits of fur tippet for their tails and other bits for their manes. And to stand on pegs instead of legs, but it was not so when they were brought home for a Christmas present. They were all right then. Neither was their harness unceremoniously nailed into their chests, as appears to be the case now. The tinkling works of the music cart, I did find out, were made of quill toothpicks and wire. And I always thought that little tumbler in his shirt sleeves, perpetually swarming up one side of a wooden frame and coming down head foremost on the other, rather a weak-minded person, though good-natured. But the Jacob's ladder next to him, made of little squares of red wood that went flapping and clattering over one another, each developing a different picture, and the whole enlivened by small bells, was a mighty marvel and a great delight. Ah! The doll's house, of which I was not proprietor, but where I visited. I don't admire the Houses of Parliament half so much as that stone-fronted mansion with real glass windows and doorsteps and a real balcony, greener than I ever see now, except at watering places. And even they afford but a poor imitation. And though it did open all at once, the entire house front, which was a blow, I admit, as cancelling the fiction of a staircase, it was but to shut it up again, and I could believe. Even open, there were 3 distinct rooms in it, a sitting room and bedroom, elegantly furnished, and best of all, a kitchen, with uncommonly soft fire irons, a plentiful assortment of diminutive utensils. Oh, the warming pan! And a tin man-cook in profile, who was always going to fry 2 fish. What Barmecide justice have I done to the noble feasts wherein the set of wooden platters figured, each with its own peculiar delicacy, as a ham or turkey glued tight onto it, and garnished with something green, which I recollect as moss? Could all the temperance societies of these later days, united, give me such a tea-drinking as I have had through the means of yonder little set of blue crockery, which really would hold liquid? It ran out of the small wooden cask, I recollect, and tasted of matches. And which made tea nectar? And if the 2 legs of the ineffectual little sugar tongs did tumble over one another and want purpose, like Punch's hands, what does it matter? And if I did once shriek out as a poisoned child, and strike the fashionable company with consternation by reason of having drunk a little teaspoon inadvertently dissolved in too hot tea, I was never the worse for it, except by a powder. Upon the next branches of the tree, lower down, hard by the green roller and miniature gardening tools, how thick the books begin to hang. Thin books, in themselves, at first, but many of them, and with deliciously smooth covers of bright red or green. What fat black letters to begin with! Was an archer, and shot at a frog. Of course he was. He was an apple pie also, and there he is. He was a good many things in his time, was A, and so were most of his friends, except X, who had so little versatility that I never knew him to get beyond Xerxes or Xantippe, like Y, who was always confined to a yacht or a yew tree. And Z, condemned forever to be a zebra or a zany. But now the very tree itself changes and becomes a beanstalk, the marvelous beanstalk up which Jack climbed to the giant's house. And now those dreadfully interesting double-headed giants, with their clubs over their shoulders, begin to stride along the boughs in a perfect throng, dragging knights and ladies home for dinner by the hair of their heads. And Jack, how noble, with his sword of sharpness and his shoes of swiftness. Again, those old meditations come upon me as I gaze up at him. And I debate within myself whether there was more than one Jack, which I am loath to believe possible, or only one genuine, original, admirable Jack, who achieved all the recorded exploits. Good for Christmas time is the ruddy color of the cloak in which the tree making a forest of itself for her to trip through with her basket. Little Red Riding Hood comes to me one Christmas Eve to give me information of the cruelty and treachery of that dissembling wolf who ate her grandmother without making any impression on his appetite, and then ate her after making that ferocious joke about his teeth. She was my first love. I felt that if I could have married Little Red Riding Hood, I should have known perfect bliss. But it was not to be, and there was nothing for it but to look out the wolf in the Noah's Ark there, and put him late in the procession on the table, as a monster who was to be degraded. Oh, the wonderful Noah's Ark! It was not found seaworthy when put in a washing tub, and the animals were crammed in at the roof, and needed to have their legs well shaken down before they could be got in, even there. And then, 10-1, but they began to tumble out at the door, which was but imperfectly fastened with a wire latch. But what was that against it? Consider the noble fly, a size or two smaller than the elephant, the ladybird, the butterfly, all triumphs of art. Consider the goose, whose feet were so small and whose balance was so indifferent that he usually tumbled forward and knocked down all the animal creation. Consider Noah and his family, like idiotic tobacco stoppers, and how the leopard stuck to warm little fingers, and how the tails of the larger animals used gradually to resolve themselves into frayed bits of string. Hush! Again a forest, and somebody up in a tree, not Robin Hood, not Valentine, not the yellow dwarf. I have passed him and all Mother Bunch's wonders without mention. But an Eastern king with a glittering scimitar and turban. By Allah! 2 Eastern kings, for I see another looking over his shoulder. Down upon the grass, at the tree's foot, lies the full length of a coal-black giant, stretched asleep, with his head in a lady's lap. And near them is a glass box, fastened with 4 locks of shining steel, in which he keeps the lady prisoner when he is awake. I see the 4 keys at his girdle now. The lady makes signs to the 2 kings in the tree, who softly descend. It is the setting in of the bright Arabian Nights. Oh, now all common things become uncommon and enchanted to me. All lamps are wonderful. All rings are talismans. Common flower pots are full of treasure, with a little earth scattered on the top. Trees are for Ali Baba to hide in. Beefsteaks are to throw down into the valley of diamonds, that the precious stones may stick to them and be carried by the eagles to their nests, whence the traders, with loud cries, will scare them. Tarts are made according to the recipe of the vizier's son of Bussorah, who turned pastry cook after he was set down in his drawers at the gate of Damascus. Cobblers are all Mustafas, and in the habit of sewing up people cut into 4 pieces, to whom they are taken blindfold. Any iron ring let into stone is the entrance to a cave which only waits for the magician and the little fire and the necromancy that will make the earth shake. All the dates imported come from the same tree as that unlucky date with whose shell the merchant knocked out the eye of the genie's invisible son. All olives are of the stuff of that fresh fruit, concerning which the commander of the faithful overheard the boy conduct the fictitious trial of the fraudulent olive merchant. All apples are akin to the apple purchased, with 2 others, from the Sultan's gardener for 3 sequins, and which the tall black slave stole from the child. All dogs are associated with the dog, really a transformed man, who jumped upon the baker's counter and put his paw on the piece of bad money. All rice recalls the rice which the awful lady, who was a ghoul, could only peck by grains because of her nightly feasts in the burial place. My very rocking horse, there he is with his nostrils turned completely inside out, indicative of blood, should have a peg in his neck, by virtue thereof to fly away with me, as the wooden horse did with the Prince of Persia. In the sight of all his father's court. Yes, on every object that I recognize among those upper branches of my Christmas tree, I see this fairy light. When I wake in bed at daybreak on the cold, dark winter mornings, the white snow dimly beheld outside through the frost on the window pane, I hear Dinarzade. Sister, sister, if you are yet awake, I pray you finish the history of the young king of the Black Islands. Scheherazade replies, If my lord the Sultan will suffer me to live another day, sister, I will not only finish that, but tell you a more wonderful story yet. Then the gracious Sultan goes out, giving no orders for the execution, and we all 3 breathe again. At this height of my tree, I begin to see, cowering among the leaves, it may be born of turkey, or of pudding, or mince pie. Or of these many fancies, jumbled with Robinson Crusoe on his desert island, Philip Quarrel among the monkeys, Sandford and Merton with Mr. Barlow, Mother Bunch and the Mask. Or it may be the result of indigestion, assisted by imagination and over-doctoring, a prodigious nightmare. It is so exceedingly indistinct that I don't know why it's frightful, but I know it is. I can only make out that it is an immense array of shapeless things, which appear to be planted on a vast exaggeration of the lazy tongs that used to bear the toy soldiers, and to be slowly coming close to my eyes, and receding to an immeasurable distance. When it comes closest, it is worse. In connection with it, I descry remembrances of winter nights incredibly long, of being sent early to bed as a punishment for some small offense, and waking in 2 hours with a sensation of having been asleep 2 nights, of the laden hopelessness of morning ever dawning, and the oppression of a weight of remorse. And now I see a wonderful row of little lights rise smoothly out of the ground before a vast green curtain. Now a bell rings, a magic bell, which still sounds in my ears unlike all other bells, and music plays amidst a buzz of voices and a fragrant smell of orange peel and oil. Anon, the magic bell commands the music to cease, and the great green curtain rolls itself up majestically, and the play begins. The devoted dog of Montargis avenges the death of his master, foully murdered in the forest of Bondy. And a humorous peasant with a red nose and a very little hat, whom I take from this hour forth to my bosom as a friend. I think he was a waiter or an ostler at a village inn, but many years have passed since he and I have met. Remarks that the sagacity of that dog is indeed surprising. And evermore this jocular conceit will live in my remembrance fresh and unfading, overtopping all possible jokes unto the end of time. Or now I learn with bitter tears how poor Jane Shore, dressed all in white and with her brown hair hanging down, went starving through the streets. Or how George Barnwell killed the worthiest uncle that ever man had, and was afterwards so sorry for it that he ought to have been let off. Come swift to comfort me, the pantomime, stupendous phenomenon, when clowns are shot from loaded mortars into the great chandelier, bright constellation that it is. When harlequins, covered all over with scales of pure gold, twist and sparkle like amazing fish. When Pantaloon, whom I deem it no irreverence to compare in my own mind to my grandfather, puts red-hot pokers in his pocket and cries, "Here's somebody coming!" Or taxes the clown with petty larceny by saying, "Now, I sawed you do it." When everything is capable, with the greatest ease, of being changed into anything, and nothing is, but thinking makes it so. Now, too, I perceive my first experience of the dreary sensation, often to return in afterlife, of being unable next day to get back to the dull, settled world. Of wanting to live forever in the bright atmosphere I have quitted. Of doting on the little fairy, with the wand like a celestial barber's pole, and pining for a fairy immortality along with her. Ah, she comes back in many shapes as my eye wanders down the branches of my Christmas tree, and goes as often, and has never yet stayed by me. Out of this delight springs the toy theater. There it is, with its familiar proscenium and ladies in feathers in the boxes, and all its attendant occupation with paste and glue and gum. And watercolors in the getting up of The Miller and His Men, and Elizabeth, or The Exile of Siberia. In spite of a few besetting accidents and failures, particularly an unreasonable disposition in the respectable Kelmar and some others to become faint in the legs and double up at exciting points of the drama, a teeming world of fancies. So suggestive and all-embracing that far below it on my Christmas tree I see dark, dirty, real theaters in the daytime, adorned with these associations, as with the freshest garlands of the rarest flowers. And charming me yet. But hark! The waits are playing, and they break my childish sleep. What images do I associate with the Christmas music as I see them set forth on the Christmas tree? Known before all the others, keeping far apart from all the others, they gather round my little bed. An angel speaking to a group of shepherds in a field. Some travelers, with eyes uplifted, following a star. A baby in a manger. A child in a spacious temple, talking with grave men. A solemn figure with a mild and beautiful face, raising a dead girl by the hand. Again, near a city gate, calling back the son of a widow on his bier to life. A crowd of people looking through the opened roof of a chamber where he sits, and letting down a sick person on a bed with ropes. The same in a tempest, walking on the water to a ship. Again on a seashore, teaching a great multitude. Again with a child upon his knee, and other children round. Again restoring sight to the blind, speech to the dumb, hearing to the deaf, health to the sick, strength to the lame, knowledge to the ignorant. Again, dying upon a cross, watched by armed soldiers, a thick darkness coming on, the earth beginning to shake, and only one voice heard: "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." Still, on the lower and maturer branches of the tree, Christmas associations cluster thick. School books shut up. Ovid and Virgil silenced. The Rule of Three, with its cool, impertinent inquiries, long disposed of. Terence and Plautus acted no more in an arena of huddled desks and forms, all chipped and notched and inked. Cricket bats, stumps, and balls left higher up, with the smell of trodden grass and the softened noise of shouts in the evening air. The tree is still fresh, still gay. If I no more come home at Christmas time, there will be boys and girls, thank heaven, while the world lasts, and they do. Yonder they dance and play upon the branches of my tree, God bless 'em, merrily, and my heart dances and plays too. And I do come home at Christmas. We all do, or we all should. We all come home, or ought to come home, for a short holiday, the longer the better, from the great boarding school where we are forever working at our arithmetical slates, to take and give a rest. As to going a-visiting, where can we not go if we will? Where have we not been when we would, starting our fancy from our Christmas tree? Away into the winter prospect. There are many such upon the tree. On by low-lying, misty grounds, through fens and fogs, up long hills, winding dark as caverns between thick plantations, almost shutting out the sparkling stars. So out on broad heights, until we stop at last, with sudden silence, at an avenue. The gate bell has a deep, half-awful sound in the frosty air. The gate swings open on its hinges. And, as we drive up to a great house, the glancing lights grow larger in the windows, and the opposing rows of trees seem to fall solemnly back on either side, to give us place. At intervals all day, a frightened hare has shot across this whitened turf, or the distant clatter of a herd of deer trampling the hard frost has, for the minute, crushed the silence too. Their watchful eyes beneath the fern may be shining now, if we could see them, like the icy dewdrops on the leaves, but they are still, and all is still. And so, the lights growing larger, and the trees falling back before us, and closing up again behind us, as if to forbid retreat, we come to the house. There is probably a smell of roasted chestnuts and other good, comfortable things all the time, for we are telling winter stories, ghost stories, or more shame for us, round the Christmas fire. And we have never stirred, except to draw a little nearer to it. But no matter for that. We came to the house, and it is an old house, full of great chimneys where wood is burnt on ancient dogs upon the hearth. And grim portraits, some of them with grim legends too, lower distrustfully from the oaken panels of the walls. We are a middle-aged nobleman, and we make a generous supper with our host and hostess and their guests, it being Christmas time, and the old house full of company, and then we go to bed. Our room is a very old room. It is hung with tapestry. We don't like the portrait of a cavalier in green over the fireplace. There are great black beams in the ceiling, and there is a great black bedstead supported at the foot by two great black figures, who seem to have come off a couple of tombs in the old baronial church in the park. For our particular accommodation. But we are not a superstitious nobleman, and we don't mind. Well, we dismiss our servant, lock the door, and sit before the fire in our dressing gown, musing about a great many things. At length we go to bed. Well, we can't sleep. We toss and tumble and can't sleep. The embers on the hearth burn fitfully and make the room look ghostly. We can't help peeping out over the counterpane at the two black figures and the cavalier, that wicked-looking cavalier, in green. In the flickering light, they seem to advance and retire, which, though we are not by any means a superstitious nobleman, is not agreeable. Well, we get nervous, more and more nervous. We say, this is very foolish, but we can't stand this. We'll pretend to be ill and knock up somebody. Well, we are just going to do it when the locked door opens, and there comes in a young woman, deadly pale and with long fair hair, who glides to the fire and sits down in the chair we have left there, wringing her hands. Then we notice that her clothes are wet. Our tongue cleaves to the roof of our mouth, and we can't speak, but we observe her accurately. Her clothes are wet. Her long hair is dabbled with moist mud. She is dressed in the fashion of 200 years ago, and she has at her girdle a bunch of rusty keys. Well! There she sits, and we can't even faint, we are in such a state about it. Presently she gets up and tries all the locks in the room with the rusty keys, which won't fit one of them. Then she fixes her eyes on the portrait of the cavalier in green, and says in a low, terrible voice, "The stags know it." After that, she wrings her hands again, passes the bedside, and goes out at the door. We hurry on our dressing gown, seize our pistols, we always travel with pistols, and are following, when we find the door locked. We turn the key, look out into the dark gallery. No one there. We wander away and try to find our servant. Can't be done. We pace the gallery till daybreak, then return to our deserted room, fall asleep, and are awakened by our servant. Nothing ever haunts him, and the shining sun. Well, We make a wretched breakfast, and all the company say we look queer. After breakfast, we go over the house with our host, and then we take him to the portrait of the Cavalier in green, and then it all comes out. He was false to a young housekeeper once attached to that family, and famous for her beauty, who drowned herself in a pond, and whose body was discovered after a long time. Because the stags refused to drink of the water. Since then, it has been whispered that she traverses the house at midnight, but goes especially to that room where the Cavalier in green was wont to sleep, trying the old locks with the rusty keys. Well, we tell our host of what we have seen, and a shade comes over his features, and he begs it may be hushed up, and so it is. But it's all true, and we said so before we died. We are dead now, to many responsible people. There is no end to the old houses with resounding galleries and dismal state bedchambers and haunted wings shut up for many years, through which we may ramble with an agreeable creeping up our back, and encounter any number of ghosts, but reducible, it is worthy of remark perhaps, to a very few general types and classes. For ghosts have little originality, and walk in a beaten track. Thus it comes to pass that a certain room in a certain old hall, where a certain bad lord, baronet, knight, or gentleman shot himself, has certain planks in the floor from which the blood will not be taken out. You may scrape and scrape, as the present owner has done, or plane and plane, as his father did, or scrub and scrub, as his grandfather did, or burn and burn with strong acids, as his great-grandfather did. But there the blood will still be, no redder and no paler, no more and no less, always just the same. Thus, in such another house, there was a haunted door that never will keep open, or another door that never will keep shut, or a haunted sound of a spinning wheel, or a hammer, or a footstep, or a cry, or a sigh, or a horse's tramp, or the rattling of a chain. Or else there is a turret clock which at the midnight hour strikes 13 when the head of the family is going to die. Or a shadowy, immovable black carriage, which at such a time is always seen by somebody, waiting near the great gates in the stable yard. Or thus it came to pass that Lady Mary went to pay a visit at a large wild house in the Scottish Highlands, and, being fatigued with her long journey, retired to bed early. And innocently said, next morning at the breakfast table, "How odd to have so late a party last night in this remote place, and not to tell me of it before I went to bed?" Then everyone asked Lady Mary what she meant. Then Lady Mary replied, "Why, all night long the carriages were driving round and round the terrace, underneath my window." Then the owner of the house turned pale, and so did his lady, and Charles MacDoodle of MacDoodle signed to Lady Mary to say no more, and everyone was silent. After breakfast, Charles MacDoodle told Lady Mary that it was a tradition in the family that those rumbling carriages on the terrace betokened death. And so it proved, for 2 months afterwards, the lady of the mansion died. And Lady Mary, who was a maid of honor at court, often told this story to the old Queen Charlotte. By this token, that the old king always said, "Eh? What? Ghosts? No such thing, no such thing," and never left off saying so until he went to bed. Or a friend of somebody's, whom most of us know, when he was a young man at college, had a particular friend with whom he made the compact that, if it were possible for the spirit to return to this earth after its separation from the body, he of the twain who first died should reappear to the other. In course of time, this compact was forgotten by our friend, the two young men having progressed in life and taken diverging paths that were wide asunder. But one night, many years afterwards, our friend, being in the north of England and staying for the night in an inn on the Yorkshire moors, happened to look out of bed. And there, in the moonlight, leaning on a bureau near the window, steadfastly regarding him, he saw his old college friend. The appearance, being solemnly addressed, replied in a kind of whisper, but very audibly, "Do not come near me. I am dead. I am here to redeem my promise. I come from another world, but may not disclose its secrets." Then the whole form, becoming paler, melted, as it were, into the moonlight, and faded away. Or there was the daughter of the first occupier of the picturesque Elizabethan house, so famous in our neighborhood. You have heard about her? No. Why, she went out one summer evening at twilight, when she was a beautiful girl, just 17 years of age, to gather flowers in the garden, and presently came running, terrified, into the hall to her father, saying, "Oh, dear father, I have met myself." He took her in his arms, and told her it was fancy, but she said, "Oh, no, I met myself in the broad walk, and I was pale and gathering withered flowers, and I turned my head and held them up." And that night she died, and a picture of her story was begun, though never finished, and they say it is somewhere in the house to this day, with its face to the wall. Or the uncle of my brother's wife was riding home on horseback one mellow evening at sunset, when, in a green lane close to his own house, he saw a man standing before him, in the very center of a narrow way. Why does that man in the cloak stand there? He thought, does he want me to ride over him? But the figure never moved. He felt a strange sensation at seeing it so still, but slackened his trot and rode forward. When he was so close to it as almost to touch it with his stirrup, his horse shied, and the figure glided up the bank in a curious, unearthly manner, backward and without seeming to use its feet, and was gone. The uncle of my brother's wife, exclaiming, "Good heaven, it's my cousin Harry from Bombay," put spurs to his horse, which was suddenly in a profuse sweat, and wondering at such strange behavior, dashed round to the front of his house. There he saw the same figure, just passing in at the long French window of the drawing-room, opening on the ground. He threw his bridle to a servant and hastened in after it. His sister was sitting there, alone. "Alice, where's my cousin Harry?" "Your cousin Harry, John?" "Yes, from Bombay. I met him in the lane just now, and saw him enter here, this instant." Not a creature had been seen by anyone, and in that hour and minute, as it afterwards appeared, this cousin died in India. Or it was a certain sensible old maiden lady who died at 99 and retained her faculties to the last, who really did see the orphan boy. A story which has often been incorrectly told, but of which the real truth is this, because it is, in fact, a story belonging to our family, and she was a connection of our family. When she was about 40 years of age, and still an uncommonly fine woman, her lover died young, which was the reason why she never married, though she had many offers. She went to stay at a place in Kent, which her brother, an Indian merchant, had newly bought. There was a story that this place had once been held in trust by the guardian of a young boy, who was himself the next heir, and who killed the young boy by harsh and cruel treatment. She knew nothing of that. It has been said that there was a cage in her bedroom in which the guardian used to put the boy. There was no such thing. There was only a closet. She went to bed, made no alarm whatever in the night, and in the morning said composedly to her maid when she came in, "Who is the pretty, forlorn-looking child who has been peeping out of that closet all night?" The maid replied by giving a loud scream, and instantly decamping. She was surprised, but she was a woman of remarkable strength of mind, and she dressed herself and went downstairs and closeted herself with her brother. "Now, Walter," she said, "I have been disturbed all night by a pretty, forlorn-looking boy who has been constantly peeping out of that closet in my room, which I can't open. This is some trick." "I am afraid not, Charlotte," said he, "for it is the legend of the house. It is the orphan boy. What did he do?" "He opened the door softly," said she, "and peeped out. Sometimes he came a step or two into the room. Then I called to him to encourage him, and he shrank and shuddered and crept in again and shut the door." "The closet has no communication, Charlotte," said her brother, "with any other part of the house, and it's nailed up." This was undeniably true, and it took 2 carpenters a whole forenoon to get it open for examination. Then she was satisfied that she had seen the orphan boy. But the wild and terrible part of the story is that he was also seen by 3 of her brother's sons, in succession, who all died young. On the occasion of each child being taken ill, he came home in a heat 12 hours before, and said, "Oh, Mamma, he had been playing under a particular oak tree in a certain meadow with a strange boy, a pretty, forlorn-looking boy, who was very timid and made signs." From fatal experience, the parents came to know that this was the orphan boy, and that the course of that child whom he chose for his little playmate was surely run. Legion is the name of the German castles where we sit up alone to wait for the spectre. Where we are shown into a room made comparatively cheerful for our reception. Where we glance round at the shadows thrown on the blank walls by the crackling fire. Where we feel very lonely when the village innkeeper and his pretty daughter have retired, after laying down a fresh store of wood upon the hearth, and setting forth on the small table such supper cheer as a cold roast capon, bread, grapes, and a flask of old Rhine wine. Where the reverberating doors close on their retreat, one after another, like so many peals of sullen thunder. And where, about the small hours of the night, we come into the knowledge of divers supernatural mysteries. Legion is the name of the haunted German students, in whose society we draw yet nearer to the fire, while the schoolboy in the corner opens his eyes wide and round, and flies off the footstool he has chosen for his seat. when the door accidentally blows open. Vast is the crop of such fruit shining on our Christmas tree, in blossom almost at the very top, ripening all down the boughs. Among the later toys and fancies hanging there, as idle often and less pure, be the images once associated with the sweet old waits, the softened music in the night, ever unalterable. Encircled by the social thoughts of Christmas time, still let the benignant figure of my childhood stand unchanged. In every cheerful image and suggestion that the season brings, may the bright star that rested above the poor roof be the star of all the Christian world. A moment's pause, O vanishing tree, of which the lower boughs are dark to me as yet, and let me look once more. I know there are blank spaces on thy branches, where eyes that I have loved have shone and smiled, and from which they are departed. But far above I see the razor of the dead girl, and the widow's son, and God is good. If age be hiding for me in the unseen portion of thy downward growth, oh may I, with a gray head, turn a child's heart to that figure yet, and a child's trustfulness and confidence. Now the tree is decorated with bright merriment, and song, and dance, and cheerfulness. And they are welcome. Innocent and welcome be they ever held beneath the branches of the Christmas tree, which cast no gloomy shadow. But as it sinks into the ground, I hear a whisper going through the leaves. This in commemoration of the law of love and kindness, mercy and compassion. This in remembrance of me. Now let us explore the work in greater depth. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Tree is best understood not as a simple seasonal sketch, but as a carefully arranged meditation on memory, childhood, storytelling, and the emotional life of objects. The decorated tree supplies both subject and organizing principle. Its branches hold toys, ornaments, miniature figures, and other bright things, while the narrator's mind moves from one object to another, allowing material details to open into remembered scenes, old tales, fears, pleasures, and vanished forms of belief. Ruth F. Glancy's work on Dickens and Christmas helps clarify the importance of this structure. Dickens's Christmas writing repeatedly gathers diverse episodes within a containing frame, and the frame does more than provide order. It creates a communal setting in which separate stories can answer one another, and private memories can become part of a larger moral and imaginative experience. In A Christmas Tree, the visual abundance of the tree performs a similar function. What first appears to be a festive inventory gradually becomes a map of consciousness, since each object can release a chain of associations. The essay therefore imitates recollection itself, selective, recursive, emotionally uneven, and capable of bringing childhood sensations into the adult present with remarkable force. Glancy's bibliography confirms its place within Dickens's wider body of Christmas and short fiction. Yet the work is less governed by a single plot than by accumulated images. Its unity comes from tone, recurrence, and framing rather than conventional action. Catherine Waters' study of commodity culture in household words offers another productive perspective. The Christmas tree is crowded with manufactured goods, decorative objects, gifts, and small representations of the world. Dickens does not present these things as inert possessions. They circulate through affection, fantasy, exchange, display, and memory, acquiring meanings that exceed practical or commercial value. A doll, a toy, or a glittering ornament can become a social object because it joins giver and receiver, child and adult, present enjoyment and remembered loss. At the same time, the profusion of things introduces an ambiguity. Domestic abundance can enchant, but it can also reveal how deeply feeling has become attached to commodities. Dickens neither rejects the festive object nor accepts it without question. Instead, he shows how material culture is transformed by narrative. Goods become emotionally legible when they are remembered, interpreted, and placed within relationships. Molly Clark Hillard's discussion of Dickens's Little Red Riding Hood and other waterside characters further illuminates the essay's return to childhood literature and its unstable border between safety and danger. Familiar tales in Dickens are rarely sealed within the nursery. They enter streets, riverbanks, houses, and adult memory, carrying patterns of pursuit, vulnerability, disguise, and rescue. A Christmas tree draws upon this storehouse of inherited images. Childhood reading is recalled not as harmless decoration, but as an active imaginative force that shaped the narrator's sense of threat and wonder. The result is a double vision. The adult recognizes the artificiality of old stories while still feeling their emotional authority. This doubleness gives the piece much of its depth. The narrator can smile at childish credulity without dismissing it, because those early fears and delights remain part of the adult self. The tree thus becomes a meeting place of temporal layers. It stands in the present, but its ornaments lead backward toward nursery tales, household rituals, theatrical impressions, and half-remembered anxieties. Dickens's characteristic Christmas warmth is therefore tempered by melancholy. Celebration depends upon recollection, and recollection inevitably reveals absence. The recovered child is vivid but unreachable. The objects survive in imagination, but the original moments have passed. Even so, the essay does not surrender to nostalgia. Its movement suggests that memory can renew experience by giving form to what would otherwise remain scattered. Framing, commodity, fairy tale, and domestic ritual converge in a work that treats Christmas as an imaginative archive. A Christmas Tree shows Dickens turning a household object into a structure for cultural memory, where private associations mingle with shared stories, and where the pleasures of possession are tested by affection, continuity, sympathy, and narrative inheritance. A Christmas Tree begins in a room overflowing with light, color, objects, and delighted children. The decorated tree is initially presented as a material spectacle, crowded with dolls, watches, miniature furniture, musical instruments, boxes, trinkets, weapons, fortune-telling witches, fruit, sweets, and artificial wonders. Dickens's catalog is deliberately excessive. It reproduces the visual and emotional abundance experienced by a child who encounters not merely a group of presents, but an entire universe compressed into a single glowing object. The tree is both domestic and magical, foreign and familiar, commercial and imaginative. Its ornaments come from workshops, shops, households, fairy tales, and dreams, yet the children do not separate these origins. To them, every object participates in the same enchantment. The opening scene establishes the essay's central method. Dickens looks at the children, but what he truly sees is the awakening of memory. Their attention turns the ornaments into magic fruit, and their wonder restores to the adult observer a forgotten mode of perception. The tree does not remain an external decoration. It becomes the Christmas tree of personal recollection, a symbolic structure whose branches hold the experiences through which childhood gradually develops into adult life. This transformation allows Dickens to move freely among objects, sensations, stories, fears, and moral ideas. He does not tell a single continuous plot. Instead, he reconstructs the inner plot of growing up. The peculiar direction of the remembered tree is significant. It appears to grow downward toward the earth. Its upper branches contain the earliest memories, while its lower branches belong to later childhood, youth, maturity, and the unexperienced future. Ordinary trees rise from visible roots toward an unknown height, but Dickens's tree descends from the dreamy brightness of infancy into the increasingly shadowed regions of adult knowledge. The image gives shape to time. Childhood occupies the luminous upper world because it is remote, imaginative, and partly inaccessible. Adulthood lies lower because it is nearer to mortality, grief, responsibility, and the earth. Yet the downward movement is not simply a fall from innocence. It is also a journey toward ethical understanding. The first ornaments on the remembered tree are toys, and Dickens recalls them with a mixture of affection, comedy, and unease. His toys possess unstable identities. A tumbler will not remain lying down. A figure springs from a snuff box with demonic force. A toy frog jumps unpredictably. A cardboard man twists into grotesque postures. These objects reveal the child's tendency to treat artificial things as living presences. Their mechanisms are not neutral. Motion seems like intention. Fixed expressions become secret emotions, and awkward design becomes moral character. The child narrator laughs at the tumbler, but inwardly distrusts it. He judges another figure to be weak-minded but good-natured. Imagination animates the toys, yet animation brings fear as readily as pleasure. This duality becomes especially powerful in the episode of The Mask. The mask is intended to be comic, but its motionless features terrify the child. Dickens carefully examines the source of that terror. It is not merely that the mask conceals a face, since an apron could do the same without producing equal horror. Nor is immobility alone the cause, because the fixed face of a doll is tolerable. The terror arises from the transformation of a living face into something fixed, altered, and unreadable. The adult narrator wonders whether the mask awakened a remote intuition of death, the universal change that will eventually make every face still. This speculation is characteristic of Dickens at his most psychologically subtle. He does not dismiss childhood fear as foolishness. He treats it as a symbolic perception that precedes intellectual understanding. The child cannot explain mortality, but the mask gives mortality a visible form. It freezes human expression while retaining the outline of humanity. Because it belongs both to the living wearer and to lifeless paper, it occupies a disturbing boundary between person and object. Even when locked away, it remains powerful. Knowledge of its existence is enough to provoke night terror. Dickens thus shows that fear is not eliminated by rational demonstration. To be told that the mask is made of paper does not dissolve the emotional truth that has attached itself to it. The remembered toys also reveal the generosity of childhood belief. The donkey's hide is real because it feels real. The spotted horse is accepted without concern for natural plausibility. Wooden horses standing on pegs are complete animals when first received as Christmas presents. Their visible construction becomes noticeable only later. This contrast between original belief and retrospective inspection captures the loss involved in maturity. The adult can now see fur scraps, nails, wires, toothpicks, and defective mechanisms. The child saw horses, carts, acrobats, houses, and worlds. Yet Dickens does not simply lament the exposure of illusion. His adult voice preserves the child's faith through loving description. The broken mechanism acquires a second life in memory. What was once magical because its construction was unseen becomes moving because its construction is now understood. The adult recognizes both the poverty of the materials and the richness of the imaginative response. A crude object could support a vast emotional reality. The essay, therefore, values neither ignorance nor sophistication alone. Its deepest pleasure comes from holding both perspectives together. The Doll's House provides one of the clearest examples of imagination overcoming material limitation. The narrator admits that opening the entire front damages the fiction of a staircase, but the fiction can be restored by closing it again. This is an important statement about imaginative cooperation. A child does not require flawless illusion. He willingly repairs inconsistencies, overlooks mechanical impossibilities, and supplies whatever reality the object lacks. The miniature kitchen, utensils, warming pan, wooden platters, glued food, blue crockery, and ineffective sugar tongs become the basis of noble feasts and unforgettable tea drinkings. The humor of these memories depends on the double vision of the adult narrator. He remembers the experience with sincere reverence, while describing its absurd physical circumstances. The tea tastes of matches, the sugar tongs collapse, and a tiny spoon dissolves in hot liquid and is accidentally swallowed. Nevertheless, none of these failures invalidate the feast. Dickens's comedy protects rather than mocks childhood. The adult knows that the objects were cheap, awkward, and sometimes unsafe, but he also knows that the pleasure they generated was authentic. Material inadequacy and imaginative splendor coexist. As books begin to thicken on the branches, the essay moves from toys that invite invention to stories that organize fantasy. Alphabet books turn letters into characters and objects. Jack and the Beanstalk transforms the tree itself into a route of adventure. Giants stride through the branches, and Jack becomes a heroic figure whose various exploits may belong to one magnificent identity. Dickens humorously recalls wondering whether there were several Jacks or one original Jack capable of every famous deed. The question illustrates the child's desire for unity within the expanding universe of stories. Little Red Riding Hood appears with a special emotional intensity. She is not merely a literary character, but the narrator's first love. Her red cloak suits the color and warmth of Christmas, while the forest she crosses seems to grow out of the tree itself. The narrator responds to her vulnerability, courage, and persecution with deep sympathy and admiration. Unable to marry her, he punishes the wolf symbolically by placing its figure late in the procession from Noah's Ark. This act is comic, but it also demonstrates the moral activity of reading. The child does not passively receive a tale. He judges its characters and rearranges his toys to express justice. The Noah's Ark is another imperfect object redeemed by imaginative authority. It is not seaworthy, its animals barely fit, the door is insecure, and their proportions are ridiculous. Yet Dickens invites the reader to admire precisely those peculiarities. The undersized fly, unstable goose, stiff Noah, sticky leopard, and fraying tails become treasured details. Memory does not preserve an ideal toy. It preserves the actual object with all its defects. Those defects are inseparable from affection because they generated repeated situations, jokes, frustrations, and tactile experiences. The arrival of the Arabian Nights marks an expansion from isolated adventures into a comprehensive enchantment of reality. Once the child has entered this imaginative world, every ordinary object becomes evidence of hidden possibility. Lamps may contain powers, rings may be talismans, flower pots may conceal treasure, trees may shelter Ali Baba, and food may participate in fabulous journeys. The world is not divided into fiction and daily life. Fiction casts a transforming light over daily life, making the ordinary appear unfinished, secretive, and capable of revelation. Dickens's references to many Arabian Nights episodes reproduce the associative abundance of childhood reading. One tale summons another, and each physical object becomes attached to a narrative precedent. Dates, olives, apples, dogs, rice, caves, eagles, cobblers, and rocking horses are no longer merely themselves. They belong to an immense network of remembered stories. The rocking horse ought to fly because another wooden horse carried a Persian prince through the air. Literature becomes a system of analogies through which the child interprets experience. This section also shows why the Christmas tree is such an effective governing symbol. A tree naturally permits branching, clustering, and unexpected proximity. Stories from different cultures and periods can hang beside toys, foods, religious images, theaters, and fears. The structure does not demand strict chronology or logical transition. Memory works by resemblance, emotional intensity, and association. The branches hold experiences together without reducing them to a single category. The nightly ritual of Scheherazade and Dinarzade adds a deeper note. The child hears the plea for another story, and the Sultan's postponement of execution allows everyone to breathe again. Storytelling here is not only entertainment. It delays death. The continuation of narrative becomes the continuation of life. This motif anticipates the essay's final movement, where memory, faith, and moral storytelling resist the annihilating force of loss. Scheherazade survives by sustaining wonder, just as Dickens preserves childhood by narrating it. The bright, imaginative world is interrupted by nightmare. The frightening vision is indistinct, and that indistinctness makes it more oppressive. It consists of shapeless things moving near and far, connected with overeating, punishment, early bedtime, darkness, and remorse. Dickens understands that childhood terror often lacks a stable object. Unlike the mask, which has a definite form, the nightmare is frightening because it cannot be fully seen or named. It gathers bodily discomfort, guilt, loneliness, and distorted memories into one approaching presence. The description of being sent early to bed is especially poignant. 2 hours of sleep feel like 2 nights. Morning seems impossibly distant, and remorse becomes a physical weight. Adult readers may recognize how small offenses can acquire enormous proportions in a child's mind. The punishment separates the child from the household's continuing life. Darkness magnifies time, and isolation makes moral guilt feel absolute. Dickens's recollection does not trivialize the experience merely because its cause was minor. Emotional scale, not objective circumstance, determines its reality. The theater then rises from the branches as a new form of enchantment. The row of lights, green curtain, bell, music, voices, and smell of orange peel and oil create a total sensory memory. Dickens recalls not only what happened on stage, but the atmosphere of expectancy surrounding performance. The theater is magical because it temporarily replaces the settled laws of ordinary existence. Murdered masters are avenged. Suffering women move the audience to tears. Repentant criminals receive emotional sympathy, and pantomime makes transformation universal. The comic language remembered from performance becomes immortal in the child's mind. A simple joke can overshadow all later humor because it is bound to the intensity of first discovery. Dickens repeatedly shows that artistic value cannot be measured solely by formal sophistication. A crude theatrical effect, a mispronounced word, or a clownish accusation may become permanent because it entered consciousness at the right moment. Memory creates its own canon. Pantomime represents the purest theatrical extension of childhood imagination. Clowns are fired into chandeliers, Harlequin glitters like a golden fish. Pantaloon survives impossible dangers, and every object can become another object. The line that nothing is fixed except by thought captures the liberating principle of the entire essay. Childhood imagination refuses the finality of appearances. A toy is more than its mechanism. A tree is more than wood and ornaments, and a stage is more than painted scenery. Yet the theater also introduces longing and disappointment. After the performance, the child cannot willingly return to the dull world. He wants to remain in the bright atmosphere and follow the fairy into immortality. The fairy returns in many forms throughout life, but never stays. She embodies the fleeting nature of enchantment, beauty, desire, and perhaps love itself. The repeated appearance and disappearance of the fairy anticipates the blank spaces later discovered on the tree, where beloved faces once shone. The toy theater allows the child to reproduce the larger theater at home. Paste, glue, paint, scenery, and paper figures create another teeming world of fancies. Mechanical failures are inevitable. Characters lose strength in their legs and collapse at dramatic moments. Once again, imperfection does not destroy the imaginative experience. The toy theater also changes the adult narrator's perception of real theaters. Even when seen by daylight as dirty and ordinary buildings, they remain adorned by childhood association. Memory does not merely preserve the past, it continues to color the present. The Christmas waits awaken a different register of memory. Their music calls forth biblical scenes from the life of Christ. The angel and shepherds, travelers following a star, the child in the manger and temple, miracles of healing and restoration, the teaching of crowds, the blessing of children, the crucifixion, and the prayer of forgiveness. These images stand apart from the other ornaments because they provide the essay's moral and spiritual center. Dickens presents Christianity primarily through acts of mercy, healing, instruction, companionship, sacrifice, and forgiveness. The central figure restores life, welcomes children, relieves suffering, teaches the ignorant, and pardons persecutors. The emphasis is not on doctrinal argument, but on moral imagination. The child's religious images become the enduring source through which Christmas acquires meaning beyond entertainment, consumption, and nostalgia. As the narrator descends to the maturer branches, school life appears. Books close, lessons cease, classical authors fall silent, and games recede into memory. Christmas becomes a release from institutional discipline and repetitive labor. The comparison between adult life and a great boarding school extends this idea. People spend their lives working at arithmetical slates and require a holiday in which they can return home, rest, give comfort, and recover imaginative freedom. Homecoming is therefore both literal and inward. One may return to a family house, but one may also return through memory to childhood stories, vanished rooms, old pleasures, and moral beginnings. Dickens insists that everyone comes home at Christmas, or should. The phrase contains warmth, but also quiet judgment. Christmas is imagined as a corrective interval in which the habits of competition, calculation, and self-absorption are suspended. The essay then enters the communal tradition of winter storytelling. The imagination travels through fog, frost, dark plantations, avenues, gates, and ancient houses. The reader becomes a middle-aged nobleman staying in a haunted chamber. Dickens shifts into the inclusive first-person plural, allowing teller and audience to inhabit the role together. We enter the room. We deny superstition. We become nervous, and we confront the apparition. The shared pronoun reproduces the social pleasure of stories told around a fire. The ghost of the betrayed housekeeper is built from familiar Gothic elements. Wet clothing, muddy hair, an old-fashioned dress, rusty keys, a guilty portrait, a drowned body, and animals that reveal concealed crime. Dickens knows these conventions are recognizable, and part of the pleasure lies in their recognizability. The story is both eerie and knowingly theatrical. The narrator repeatedly insists that the nobleman is not superstitious while describing his growing terror. The comic qualification intensifies rather than cancels the suspense. When the ghost declares that the stags know the truth, supernatural justice enters the tale. Human beings concealed betrayal, but the natural world refused complicity. The stags would not drink from the pond containing the drowned woman's body. Her return exposes a moral crime that respectable society would prefer to silence. Even after the revelation, the host asks that the matter be suppressed. The ghost story thus dramatizes memory's resistance to social concealment. What has been wrongfully buried continues to walk. Dickens next reflects that ghosts possess little originality. Haunted houses repeat a limited set of patterns: ineradicable bloodstains, doors that refuse normal behavior, sounds without visible sources, clocks that foretell death, phantom carriages, apparitions fulfilling promises, doubles predicting death, and distant figures appearing at the moment of dying. This observation is humorous, but it also identifies the ritual quality of ghost stories. Their repetition is not necessarily a weakness. Familiar forms permit listeners to anticipate, fear, recognize, and participate. The stories that follow are variations on separation and death. Lady Mary hears carriages that signal an approaching loss. A college friend returns to redeem a forgotten promise. A young woman meets her own pale double gathering withered flowers. A man sees a cousin in England at the exact moment the cousin dies in India. The orphan boy appears from a sealed closet and later becomes a fatal playmate to children. Each tale gives death a visible or audible sign before ordinary knowledge catches up with it. These apparitions collapse distance. The dead cross locked doors, oceans, years, and social silence. In this sense, the ghost stories repeat the function of memory itself. Memory also makes the absent present, joins distant times, and allows vanished figures to appear within an inhabited room. The Christmas tree is already a haunted object because its branches contain people, places, emotions, and forms of belief that no longer exist in their original state. The orphan boy is the most disturbing of these figures because he combines innocence, cruelty, and repetition. Murdered through harsh guardianship, he continues to appear as a timid child. His gestures seem to ask for companionship, yet the children who play with him die. The story turns neglected childhood into a haunting force. The victim cannot leave the world because his suffering has not been morally resolved. At the same time, his loneliness reproduces itself by drawing other children away from life. The sensible maiden lady who sees him is important because her composure lends authority to the tale. She does not scream or surrender to fantasy. She observes, investigates, and accepts the apparition only after the sealed closet is physically opened. Dickens plays with conventions of evidence, testimony, and family authenticity. The more insistently the narrator claims factual reliability, the more clearly the reader can hear the performance of oral storytelling. German castles and students enlarge the supernatural landscape, but Dickens keeps the social setting visible. The fire, food, wine, innkeeper, daughter, schoolboy, closing doors, and shared anticipation matter as much as the specters. Ghost stories are communal rituals through which fear becomes pleasurable. Listeners draw nearer to the fire and to one another. The supernatural tale allows a group to approach mortality while remaining protected by warmth, company, and narrative form. The late branches of the tree contain toys and fancies that may be less pure than those of childhood. Adult imagination can become idle, sensational, or morally confused. Yet Dickens refuses to abandon the earlier sacred images summoned by the waits. He asks that the benevolent figure of childhood faith remain unchanged among the social thoughts of Christmas. The bright star above the poor roof should become the star of the whole Christian world. At this point, the Christmas tree reveals blank spaces. Eyes once loved have disappeared from the branches. The festive object becomes an emblem of bereavement. Every mature celebration contains absences because returning seasons measure not only continuity, but loss. The same rituals recur, while the people who once participated in them vanish. Dickens does not identify the absent figures, and this restraint gives the passage broad emotional power. Readers may place their own dead within the empty spaces. The essay's treatment of loss does not reject sorrow or cover it with forced cheerfulness. Instead, it places absence within a larger vision of restoration. The narrator looks above the blank spaces to the figure who raised the dead girl and the widow's son. Christian trust does not erase grief, but it prevents grief from being the final meaning of memory. The tree contains both vacancy and promise. The unseen lower branches represent old age and the future still hidden from the narrator. He does not know what experiences will appear there. His hope is not that he will remain young, but that age will preserve a child's heart in relation to the figure of mercy. This desire gathers the essay's apparently scattered materials into a coherent moral movement. Childhood is not valuable merely because it was pleasurable. It contains capacities that adulthood must recover: trust, wonder, tenderness, imaginative sympathy, and receptiveness to love. The concluding return to merriment is therefore carefully qualified. Song, dance, laughter, and cheerfulness are innocent and welcome. Dickens does not oppose spiritual seriousness to festivity. The ornaments, toys, food, theater, games, stories, and gatherings all have legitimate places beneath the tree. What matters is the law under which they are enjoyed. The celebration must remember love, kindness, mercy, and compassion. The whisper through the leaves transforms the entire tree. Every bright object becomes commemorative. Christmas is not simply a season in which people possess more things, indulge more freely, or revisit private memories. Its pleasures are justified when they express care for others and remembrance of a life defined by compassion. The voice heard in the leaves redirects nostalgia toward responsibility. This final movement prevents A Christmas Tree from becoming merely sentimental autobiography. Dickens's memories are intensely personal, but their purpose is communal and ethical. He reconstructs childhood not to escape adult life, but to renew the emotional resources required for humane adulthood. The essay asks readers to preserve the child's susceptibility to wonder while gaining the adult's awareness of suffering. The structure also demonstrates Dickens's remarkable control of tone. The prose moves from sparkling abundance to comic grotesque, from literary enthusiasm to nightmare, from theatrical ecstasy to sacred reverence, from school holiday to Gothic entertainment, and from ghostly death to religious hope. These changes do not feel arbitrary because all are held within the branches of memory. Christmas itself accommodates such contrasts. It is noisy and contemplative, childish and ancient, domestic and supernatural, joyful and elegiac. The work's long catalogues are essential to this design. They reproduce the mind's inability to isolate one memory from another. An ornament recalls a toy. The toy recalls a fear. The fear recalls a story. The story changes the appearance of the world. The world leads to theater, music, scripture, school, homecoming, travel, ghosts, death, and faith. The prose grows by accumulation, much as the decorated tree becomes beautiful through the clustering of unlike objects. Objects in the essay are never merely decorative. They are containers of time. A toy preserves a bodily sensation, a fear, a family scene, a childish judgment, and an adult interpretation. A book preserves not only its plot, but the circumstances in which it was read and the world it made newly visible. A theater preserves smells, sounds, social excitement, and the ache of departure. The Christmas tree gathers material culture into emotional history. Dickens also recognizes that childhood imagination includes cruelty and darkness. Giants devour people. Wolves deceive children. Nightmares approach. criminals murder, ghosts announce death, and the crucifixion stands among the sacred images. Innocence is not ignorance of danger. The child meets mortality symbolically long before understanding it intellectually. Stories and toys provide forms through which fear can be approached, judged, punished, transformed, and remembered. The adult narrator's humor is crucial because it keeps the essay from idealizing childhood into perfect sweetness. Children swallow dissolving spoons, arrange absurd animal processions, become terrified by harmless paper, misunderstand theatrical morality, and accept impossible machinery. These comic details make the recollections credible and affectionate. Dickens loves the child's errors because they reveal imaginative seriousness. The narrator also laughs at adult habits. The supposedly rational nobleman grows terrified. Family legends are supported by elaborate chains of testimony. Respectable hosts suppress inconvenient truths. Skeptics endlessly deny ghosts while continuing to discuss them. Adulthood is not presented as complete enlightenment. Adults remain theatrical, credulous, self-deceiving, fearful, and dependent on stories. A Christmas Tree finally proposes that identity is composed of remembered scenes rather than a single continuous account. The narrator is simultaneously the frightened child, the enchanted reader, the theater lover, the schoolboy returning home, the teller of ghost stories, the mourner of absent faces, and the adult hoping to age without spiritual hardening. The tree holds these selves together. The work remains compelling because its central insight extends beyond Christmas. Human beings invest objects with emotional life, organize time through recurring rituals, inherit moral understanding through stories, and revisit childhood in order to interpret adulthood. Memory does not reproduce the past exactly. It illuminates, rearranges, enlarges, and sometimes frightens. Like the tapers on the tree, it casts unstable light across what has vanished. Dickens's final achievement is to turn nostalgia into an obligation. To remember childhood rightly is to become more merciful, not merely more wistful. To remember the dead is to recognize the preciousness of the living. To enjoy festivity is to share warmth. To tell stories is to preserve sympathy. The tree's deepest ornament is not any toy, book, performance, or ghostly legend, but the law of love that gives all those memories their humane significance. Let us now examine the work through its primary analytical perspective. A Christmas Tree is structured as a private act of recollection, yet Dickens' memories continually reveal the social world that produced them. The Christmas tree appears to be an intimate domestic object, but its branches hold commodities, institutions, educational practices, religious beliefs, class relations, theatrical conventions, family duties, and collective expectations. The narrator does not merely remember isolated toys or stories. He reconstructs the process through which a 19th century child learns to inhabit society. The tree becomes a social diagram whose downward growth traces development from early sensation to adult responsibility. Its ornaments show how the self is formed by objects and narratives supplied by families, schools, markets, churches, theaters, servants, nurses, booksellers, manufacturers, and inherited traditions. The opening scene presents Christmas as a ritual of social abundance. Children gather around a German Christmas tree covered with dolls, watches, miniature furniture, musical instruments, books, workboxes, weapons, trinkets, sweets, and artificial fruit. The apparent universality of delight depends upon a dense commercial network. The toys have been manufactured, transported, purchased, arranged, and distributed. Dickens even identifies Wolverhampton as the source of the tin domestic furniture, briefly exposing the industrial origin of objects that appear magical to the children. The tree transforms manufactured goods into enchanted fruit, concealing labor beneath spectacle. Industrial products become signs of affection, domestic stability, aspiration, and social belonging. This transformation does not make the celebration merely hypocritical. Dickens understands that commodities can acquire emotional meanings exceeding their economic value. The children do not see anonymous manufactured goods. They see possibilities, houses, occupations, adventures, friendships, families, fears, and imagined futures. Nevertheless, the abundance of the tree also marks the household as materially secure. Its everything and more is not available to every child. The room contains mothers, aunts, nurses, and children protected by an organized domestic world. The social harmony of the scene rests on property, leisure, household service, and the ability to purchase objects whose practical uselessness is part of their charm. Christmas generosity thus appears within a class structure that makes some homes centers of abundance, while leaving other roofs poor. The social meaning of the miniature furniture is especially revealing. Chairs, bedsteads, clocks, wardrobes, tables, kitchens, utensils, crockery, and workboxes introduce children to the material grammar of respectable domestic life. The doll's house is a model of the classed household, complete with sitting room, bedroom, kitchen, balcony, servant-like cook, and ceremonial meals. Through play, the child enters an idealized social order in which rooms have distinct functions, meals appear properly arranged, and domestic abundance seems natural. The doll's house is not simply an architectural fantasy. It is a miniature institution teaching the divisions, routines, comforts, and hierarchies of home. The narrator is not the proprietor of the doll's house, but a visitor. This small distinction suggests that access to social spaces is unequally distributed, even within childhood. Ownership, visitation, admiration, and exclusion are already part of play. Yet, imagination temporarily softens these divisions. The child may enter the house through belief, even when the opening front reveals the mechanical artifice and destroys the illusion of a staircase. By closing it again, he restores the fiction. Social life itself often depends upon comparable acts of selective belief. The stability of the household, the dignity of institutions, and the authority of rituals require participants to overlook visible mechanisms and accept symbolic appearances. Gender norms are distributed across the tree. Elder girls receive trinkets, baskets, pincushions, needle cases, bouquet holders, and objects associated with ornament, domestic skill, sociability, and future feminine respectability. Other branches carry guns, swords, banners, soldiers, heroic jacks, kings, giants, sailors, explorers, and adventurers. These objects offer masculine scripts of conquest, independence, violence, and public action. Dickens does not pause to theorize the distinction, but his inventory demonstrates how material culture socializes children before abstract rules are fully understood. Toys teach what kinds of desire, labor, courage, beauty, and authority are considered appropriate to different members of society. The cardboard lady who dances and the grotesque cardboard man also show how social identities become performances. Their bodies are manipulated, posed, hung, and moved by strings. The child encounters adulthood through caricatured forms: the elegant lady, the sinister man, the counselor in legal dress, the soldier, the cook, the king, the fairy, and the criminal. Occupations and ranks appear first as costumes and gestures. Society is introduced as theater. Adults inhabit recognizable roles, while children learn to interpret power through clothing, posture, voice, and controlled movement. The terrifying counselor springing from the snuff box gives institutional authority a demonic form. His black gown and exaggerated head of hair identify the law through visual signs, but the child experiences those signs before understanding legal procedure. Authority, therefore, enters consciousness as shock, costume, and threat. The toy's mechanical surprise resembles the unpredictable eruption of adult judgment into childhood. Rules are often incomprehensible to children, yet punishment is real. The later memories of being sent early to bed for a small offense confirm that discipline precedes mature comprehension. The child knows the weight of guilt and the apparent endlessness of punishment before he can evaluate whether the offense deserves such severity. The mask intensifies this problem of social identity. Dickens distinguishes it from the doll's fixed face because the mask covers a living person. It displays an immovable expression where responsiveness should exist. Sociologically, the mask suggests the anxiety produced when social roles replace recognizable human relations. A familiar person becomes inaccessible behind an official or artificial face. The terror may anticipate the adult discovery that institutions require individuals to assume fixed identities: judge, teacher, servant, master, criminal, nobleman, respectable woman, dutiful child. The mask is frightening because it reveals that the social face can become detached from inward feeling. The narrator's speculation that the mask suggests death adds another collective dimension. Mortality is not merely biological. It is socially represented through still faces, funerary images, religious instruction, ghost stories, and mourning customs. The child's dread arises before explicit theological consolation. Later, the image of Christ raising the dead girl and the widow's son will place death within a moral and religious structure. The essay therefore traces a movement from unregulated fear to culturally mediated understanding. Society supplies both the images that terrify and the narratives that make terror bearable. Books occupy a lower and more mature region of the tree because literacy enlarges the institutions shaping the child. Alphabet books teach more than letters. They classify the world into memorable images and repeated verbal formulas. The limited fates of X, Y, and Z humorously reveal how educational systems reduce complexity to standard associations. Xerxes, Xantippe, yachts, yew trees, zebras, and zanies become fixed curricular answers. The alphabet disciplines language by arranging knowledge into ordered units. Yet children resist such limitation by turning the educational object into imaginative play. The letter A becomes archer, apple pie, and many other things. The system intends regularity, but imagination creates excess. Formal schooling later appears through Ovid, Virgil, Terence, Plautus, arithmetic, desks, forms, and the rule of three. Dickens depicts school as a world of repetitive labor whose exercises are temporarily suspended at Christmas. The school is described as a boarding school from which everyone ought to come home for a holiday. Adult life itself becomes an extension of that institution, with humanity perpetually working at arithmetical slates. This metaphor exposes the disciplinary character of modern society. Productivity, calculation, duty, and measurable performance govern both children and adults. Christmas interrupts that regime by legitimizing rest, memory, hospitality, and emotional exchange. The holiday is therefore socially necessary rather than merely decorative. It provides a sanctioned pause from institutions that fragment time into lessons, work, obligations, and accounts. The narrator's insistence that all should come home expresses a norm of reintegration. Individuals dispersed by school, work, travel, age, and ambition are recalled to a common center. Home becomes both a physical household and an ethical ideal. Dickens knows that not everyone can return, and the language of should and ought carries moral pressure. Christmas imposes its own collective expectation. One must remember, forgive, gather, give, and become emotionally available. This pressure can be benevolent, but it is still pressure. The season demands cheerfulness, even from those confronting absence. The narrator sees blank spaces where beloved eyes once shone. Mourning is admitted, but it is incorporated into a larger affirmation of divine goodness and continuing social love. The individual is encouraged to transform grief into sympathy. Dickens's Christmas ideal does not eliminate sorrow. It gives sorrow a communal purpose. The dead remain part of the moral community through memory, while the living are instructed to turn loss into compassion. The family is the first institution mediating these values. Mothers, aunts, nurses, grandparents, siblings, hosts, servants, and children populate the recollections. Yet Dickens's use of the first-person plural expands the family beyond biography. We enter houses, listen to stories, become noblemen, witness ghosts, visit theaters, and return home. This pronoun creates a temporary community between narrator and reader. Social identity becomes participatory. The reader is invited to recognize shared fears and pleasures, even when the specific objects differ. The essay thus manufactures collective memory from individual memory. This collective voice also reveals the assumptions of Dickens's imagined readership. The we often occupies privileged positions. It travels by carriage to country houses, sleeps in state bedrooms, employs servants, carries pistols, knows noble families, attends theaters, reads classical texts, and possesses leisure for winter storytelling. The ghost story sequence repeatedly centers on aristocratic halls, inherited estates, portraits, family traditions, and servants. Such settings reflect the cultural fascination of the middle classes with landed history. Readers can imaginatively enter elite spaces and enjoy their dangers without acquiring their responsibilities. The old house condenses social power. Its avenues, gates, deer, portraits, bedchambers, galleries, servants, and hereditary legends display accumulated property and authority. Yet the house is haunted because privilege preserves wrongdoing as well as wealth. The cavalier's betrayal of the housekeeper returns as a ghostly accusation. His portrait remains publicly honored, while the injured woman survives only through a suppressed story. The haunting exposes an unequal relation between a powerful man and a dependent woman. Her wet clothes, rusty keys, and repeated attempts to open locks symbolize restricted agency. She possesses the instruments of service, but cannot unlock the structure that confines her. The phrase, "the stags know it," transfers testimony from subordinate human beings to the natural world. The household would prefer silence, and the host asks that the incident be hushed up. Power protects reputation by controlling narration. The ghost story resists that control. It circulates precisely because official history excludes the victim. The haunting is therefore a social memory of injustice. What the family suppresses becomes communal legend. Many of the later ghost stories follow the same pattern. Blood cannot be removed from the floor where a gentleman killed himself. Doors refuse ordinary control. Clocks announce the death of family heads. Carriages circle aristocratic terraces before a death. Apparitions redeem forgotten promises. A young woman encounters her double before dying. A colonial relative appears at the instant of death in India. These stories dramatize anxieties about inheritance, kinship, distance, secrecy, and the failure of authority to govern consequences. The colonial references are brief but significant. India and Bombay enter domestic storytelling through merchants, absent cousins, wealth, and supernatural communication. Empire appears as a distant extension of the family economy. Men travel outward for commerce or advancement, while English households remain connected to them through letters, money, memory, and imagined spiritual bonds. The apparition from Bombay collapses imperial distance, making the remote death immediately present in the English home. The supernatural performs the communication that geography and limited technology cannot guarantee. The orphan boy story exposes another abuse of guardianship. A guardian entrusted with a child's property kills him through cruel treatment. The institution designed to protect inheritance becomes an instrument of exploitation. The sealed closet materializes the concealment of violence within respectable property. The sensible maiden lady's testimony carries special force because she is represented as rational, composed, and socially reliable. Dickens knows that ghost narratives require credible witnesses, but the emphasis on credibility also reflects whose speech society accepts. A servant's scream is insufficient. A strong-minded gentlewoman's account becomes family evidence. Even then, the orphan boy's suffering is converted into hereditary omen. His appearance predicts the deaths of other children. The original injustice is not repaired. Instead, it reproduces fear across generations. This pattern resembles the sociological transmission of trauma. An unresolved act becomes embedded in family identity, domestic space, and child-rearing anxiety. The legend teaches that private cruelty cannot remain private. Its effects pass through the household long after legal accountability has become impossible. The theater offers a contrasting social institution. It is public, commercial, collective, and openly artificial. The audience gathers amid music, lights, orange peel, oil, voices, curtains, costumes, and machinery. Unlike the mask, theatrical disguise is framed by shared convention. Everyone knows that transformation is part of the performance. The child can therefore experience fear, grief, comedy, violence, and wonder within a socially regulated space. Jane Shore and George Barnwell produce moral sympathy. The pantomime releases comic disorder. Harlequin and clown overturn ordinary rules. Pantomime is especially important because it temporarily suspends fixed identities and material limits. Everything can become anything. Objects change functions. Bodies survive impossible violence. Servants mock authority. Thieves become comic figures, and social dignity collapses into physical farce. Such disorder is licensed rather than revolutionary. It occurs within the theater and ends with the performance. Nevertheless, it gives the child an experience of contingency. The settled world is not the only imaginable world. Social arrangements may be transformed, inverted, exaggerated, or laughed at. The toy theater domesticates this public institution. With paste, glue, paint, scenery, and paper actors, the child becomes manager, craftsman, dramatist, and audience. He learns that spectacle requires labor. The faint legs of paper characters expose the instability behind representation. Yet, failure does not destroy enchantment. The child's creative activity demonstrates that culture is reproduced through participation, not passive consumption alone. He does not merely receive stories, he stages them, alters them, and attaches them to later theatrical experience. Religious imagery occupies a morally authoritative position on the tree. The scenes of Christ's birth, teaching, healing, forgiveness, and resurrection organize the diverse memories around a principle of compassionate power. The miracles reverse ordinary social exclusion. The sick, poor, disabled, ignorant, grieving, and condemned become the center of attention. Authority is measured not by domination, but by mercy. The final law of love and kindness, mercy and compassion judges the other institutions represented throughout the essay. This religious ideal also corrects the class limitations of the opening celebration. The star rests above a poor roof, not a mansion. The child in the manger stands against the abundance of manufactured gifts. Dickens does not reject festivity, toys, food, dance, or theatrical pleasure. He asks that they remain under the ethical sign of compassion. Merriment is innocent only when it casts no gloomy shadow, meaning that celebration should not depend upon indifference to suffering. The final whisper turns commemoration into obligation. Christmas is not merely remembrance of a sacred event, but a repeated social law. Kindness must become practice. The wording shifts attention from private emotion to collective conduct. A society may possess wealth, schools, theaters, religious symbols, families, and inherited customs, yet it fails if it does not extend mercy to vulnerable people. Dickens's sociological vision is therefore moral rather than systematic. He reads society through the pressures exerted upon children, servants, dependents, women, orphans, the poor, the sick, and the grieving. The downward growing tree represents the accumulation of these pressures. Childhood does not disappear. It remains suspended above adult consciousness. Early fears shape later ideas of authority. Toys prepare domestic and gender roles. Books create cultural knowledge. School disciplines time and thought. Theater provides emotional education. Ghost stories preserve hidden conflicts. Religion establishes an ethical standard. Christmas gathers these forces into a temporary community of remembrance. Yet the tree also contains blank spaces and unseen branches. Social life is never fully knowable. Age, death, and future experience remain concealed. Dickens responds to uncertainty by returning to childlike trust, but this is not simple regression. The mature narrator has learned that innocence must be consciously renewed. A child's heart becomes an ethical achievement for the adult, requiring resistance to calculation, isolation, cynicism, and hardened hierarchy. A Christmas tree ultimately presents society as a network of shared images through which individuals recognize themselves and one another. Objects, stories, rituals, and institutions may discipline people, reproduce inequality, or conceal injustice. They may also create sympathy, imaginative freedom, continuity, and moral fellowship. Dickens does not imagine that society can exist without conventions. His concern is which conventions should govern it. Against fear, secrecy, domination, and cold calculation, he proposes hospitality, play, memory, mercy, and compassionate recognition. A second perspective reveals further dimensions of the work. From the perspective of folklore studies, a Christmas tree is a treasury of customs, tale types, ritual images, popular performances, supernatural legends, and remembered beliefs. Dickens does not present folklore as a remote survival belonging only to rural or uneducated communities. It permeates the modern household. The decorated tree carries fairy tales, biblical narratives, ghost legends, nursery lore, pantomime figures, oriental tales, seasonal music, divination toys, heroic adventures, and family anecdotes. Folklore is shown as a living process through which inherited stories attach themselves to objects and are renewed in imagination. The Christmas tree itself is both an imported custom and an organizing folk symbol. Dickens calls it a German toy, acknowledging its cultural origin while showing its absorption into an English domestic celebration. Once placed at the center of the room, the tree becomes more than decoration. It is a ritual axis joining generations, objects, stories, and stages of life. Its branches resemble the layered structure of memory, while its lights turn ordinary manufactured things into magical fruit. The household ceremony temporarily creates a sacred imaginative space. Seasonal ritual depends upon repetition. The children gather, lights shine, gifts hang from the branches, music sounds, stories are told, schoolwork ceases, relatives return, food is shared, and the home becomes a center of hospitality. These acts link the present celebration with earlier Christmases. Their meaning lies not in novelty, but in recurrence. Each generation performs familiar gestures and thereby experiences continuity with those who celebrated before. The phrase, "we all come home," or ought to come home, expresses the customary force of the season. Christmas return is both physical movement and ritual restoration. The scattered members of society re-enter the domestic circle, exchange gifts, suspend ordinary labor, and renew bonds. The pattern resembles a rite of reversal or temporary release. Schools close, classical authors fall silent, arithmetic is dismissed, and the routines of discipline give way to feasting, storytelling, music, games, and imaginative travel. The toys embody folk motifs because the child does not keep them within their material identities. A tumbler becomes uncanny, a mask suggests death, a frog becomes monstrous, a Jacob's ladder becomes a marvel, and toy animals participate in biblical and fairy tale worlds. Folkloric thinking does not sharply separate animate from inanimate. Objects acquire agency, intention, danger, and personality. A toy that refuses to lie down seems stubborn. A cardboard figure becomes sinister. A rocking horse may conceal the power of flight. Childhood imagination reproduces an animistic mode in which the material world is alive with hidden possibilities. The disturbing mask belongs to a wide folkloric association between disguise and transformation. Masks permit a living person to appear as something fixed, strange, or non-human. They destabilize identity because the visible face no longer guarantees the person beneath it. In seasonal customs, theater, masquerade, and popular festivity, masks often allow temporary crossings between social and supernatural worlds. Dickens's child cannot interpret the mask through such formal categories, but his terror recognizes its liminal character. The wearer is both present and absent, human and artificial, familiar and unknown. Fairy tales form one of the largest clusters on the tree. Jack and the Beanstalk supplies the vertical journey into a giant's house, magic weapons, supernatural speed, and heroic combat. Little Red Riding Hood contributes the forest path, the basket, the deceptive wolf, devouring, rescue, and the child's intense emotional identification with a vulnerable heroine. These stories are not treated as texts to be clinically interpreted. They are remembered as worlds entered through love, fear, admiration, and play. The narrator's question about whether there was one Jack or many humorously touches upon a central feature of folklore. Folk heroes recur across multiple narratives, acquiring new adventures while retaining a recognizable identity. Jack can be giant killer, climber, trickster, brave youth, or fortunate fool. His unity does not depend upon historical consistency. It arises from the collective imagination's need for a flexible hero capable of confronting exaggerated dangers. Little Red Riding Hood functions similarly as a character whose story exceeds any single written version. The narrator remembers cruelty, treachery, appetite, disguise, and the grotesque joke about the wolf's teeth. The tale teaches suspicion of appearances and fear of predatory deception, yet Dickens emphasizes emotional attachment rather than moral instruction. The child's wish to marry the heroine turns a communal tale into personal romance. Folklore becomes intimate because listeners place themselves inside inherited plots. Noah's Ark shows the mingling of sacred story, toy culture, and comic play. The biblical flood is miniaturized into a wooden vessel whose animals will not remain orderly. The unstable goose knocks down creation. The creatures differ absurdly in scale, and Noah's family resemble tobacco stoppers. Reverence and humor coexist. The sacred narrative is not destroyed by play. It becomes familiar, tangible, and memorable. Folk religion often works through such domestic adaptation, in which canonical stories circulate through toys, pictures, songs, and family retellings. The Arabian Nights introduces another major stream of traditional narrative. The child encounters kings, giants, imprisoned women, magical rings, caves, genies, talismans, transformed men, ghoul-like beings, flying horses, hidden treasure, and extraordinary foods. These motifs spread beyond the books into everyday perception. Lamps become possible vessels of wonder. Rings become talismans. Flower pots conceal treasure. Cobblers become secret restorers of dismembered bodies. And ordinary food recalls enchanted episodes. This transformation demonstrates how folklore alters the perceived environment. A story is not confined to the moment of narration. It creates a symbolic lens through which later objects are interpreted. The child who has heard of Ali Baba sees trees as hiding places. The child who knows the Valley of Diamonds imagines meat carrying jewels to eagles. Narrative motifs colonize the ordinary world, making it perpetually available for enchantment. The framed storytelling of Scheherazade also becomes a ritual of suspense. At dawn, the child hears the remembered exchange between Dinarzadeh and her sister. The tale must remain unfinished, so that life may continue for another day. Storytelling possesses protective power. Speech postpones execution, curiosity restrains violence, and narrative continuity becomes equivalent to survival. Dickens reproduces this pattern in his own essay, moving from memory to memory, so that the tree remains visible and the past remains alive. The theater and pantomime preserve popular traditions of stylized characters, repeated jokes, transformation scenes, music, spectacle, and audience participation. Harlequin, pantaloon, clown, and fairy are not psychologically realistic individuals. They are durable folk types. Their identities depend on costume, gesture, familiar conflict, and repeated comic business. The pleasure of pantomime comes partly from recognition. Audiences expect certain figures and transformations, but each performance renews them through variation. The waits represent an explicitly seasonal custom. Their music breaks the child's sleep and gathers sacred images around his bed. Sound, rather than doctrine, initiates the vision. The music belongs to the night, the street, the community, and the recurring calendar. It connects household space with public celebration. Through it, biblical scenes become part of lived seasonal memory. Shepherds, star-following travelers, the manger, the temple, healings, resurrection, teaching, crucifixion, and forgiveness. These images show how collective belief is formed through repeated representation. The child knows sacred history not only from formal religious teaching, but from music, pictures, stories, performances, and Christmas observance. The benignant figure of childhood remains unchanged because ritual repetition stabilizes it. Folklore studies helps explain why such images possess emotional authority, even when doctrinal details recede. They are embedded in sensory memory. The long sequence of ghost stories belongs to the tradition of winter storytelling. The narrator explicitly places the company around the Christmas fire, surrounded by roasted chestnuts and comforting warmth. The contrast between safe listeners and dangerous tales is essential. Ghost stories produce controlled fear within communal security. The dark road, old house, locked room, dying fire, wet apparition, hidden crime, and morning explanation form a recognizable narrative pattern. The ghost of the drowned housekeeper exemplifies the revenant who returns because of betrayal and unacknowledged death. Her wet clothing identifies the manner of death, while rusty keys connect her to her former domestic role. Her mysterious statement must be decoded through local history. Animals reveal the hidden body by refusing to drink from the pond. This motif reflects a collective belief that nature responds to moral pollution. Human power may conceal a crime, but the non-human world bears witness. The story's authentication follows oral traditional practice. The narrator insists that it is true and traces testimony through responsible people. Other tales are linked to friends, relatives, court figures, old families, and named regions. Such chains of transmission imitate the way legends gain credibility. The teller rarely claims direct universal proof. Instead, truth is supported by social proximity. It happened to someone connected with someone known. The recurring phrases "or" and "there was" reproduce the rhythm of oral accumulation. One example calls forth another. The stories vary in detail, but share stable motifs: ineradicable blood, doors that behave unnaturally, warning sounds, clocks striking an impossible hour, death coaches, spectral doubles, crisis apparitions, fulfilled promises, haunted children, and ancestral guilt. Dickens observes that ghosts have little originality and follow beaten tracks. This comment is comic, but it accurately recognizes the formulaic character of legend. Formula does not make the stories meaningless. Repetition allows communities to express recurring fears. Ineradicable blood represents guilt that cannot be cleansed. A door that will not remain open or shut marks a violated boundary. 13 strokes at midnight disturb the ordinary measurement of time. A black carriage anticipates the final journey. The double suggests division between living identity and approaching death. The apparition of a distant relative answers anxiety about separation. The ghost compact between college friends uses the widespread motif of a promise between the living and the dead. The returned spirit confirms personal continuity after death, but refuses to reveal the secrets of the next world. The legend offers evidence and prohibition at once. It satisfies the desire to believe in survival while preserving mystery. Its power depends upon restraint. The ghost gives only the message required to redeem the promise. The young woman who meets herself while gathering withered flowers combines the double motif with symbols of premature death. Her living self encounters a pale version performing an action associated with decay. The unfinished portrait, with its face turned to the wall, extends the story into a haunted object. Folklore frequently locates memory in material remains. A picture, room, tree, pond, stain, clock, closet, or key becomes the physical anchor of a tale. The orphan boy legend joins haunting with violated guardianship and child mortality. The timid child peeping from a sealed closet embodies concealed suffering. His later appearances beneath an oak tree turn him into an omen who selects playmates destined to die. The meadow and tree give the supernatural encounter a fixed local setting, enabling repetition across generations. The family gradually learns the omen's meaning through fatal experience, a common pattern in legends where interpretation develops only after recurrence. German castles, haunted students, Rhine wine, lonely rooms, firelight, Innkeepers and midnight revelations form another recognized folklore landscape. The foreign setting intensifies mystery while remaining familiar through literary convention. The German material also returns the essay to the cultural origin of the Christmas tree. What begins as a German domestic custom expands into Germanic castles and spectral lore, suggesting the movement of traditions across borders. The final religious whisper gives the whole collection a ritual frame. Fairy tales, ghost stories, popular theater, family legends, and sacred images are not left as disconnected curiosities. They converge upon remembrance. Christmas customs preserve the law of love by repeating stories in which vulnerability, danger, rescue, guilt, mercy, death, and renewal are made emotionally intelligible. The tree is therefore a living archive of collective imagination. Finally, here are several companion works worth reading. Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol is the closest companion because it also treats Christmas as a ritual interruption of isolation, calculation, and social neglect. Ebenezer Scrooge's supernatural education resembles the movement of a Christmas tree from private memory toward communal responsibility. Both works join ghostly experience with an ethical demand for generosity, though A Christmas Carol uses a concentrated dramatic plot, while A Christmas Tree proceeds through associative recollection. Dickens's The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain offers another revealing comparison. Its central concern is the danger of losing painful memory. A Christmas Tree likewise argues that sorrow, fear, and absence must not simply be erased, because memory is one of the foundations of sympathy. The blank spaces on the tree remain painful, but they also preserve love and moral connection. E.T.A. Hoffman's The Nutcracker and the Mouse King is especially relevant to the folklore dimension. It transforms Christmas toys into an animated world where domestic objects, childhood fears, magical conflict, and dream logic become inseparable. Hoffman's tale is darker and more unstable, but both works treat the Christmas household as a threshold between ordinary material life and enchantment. Hans Christian Andersen's The Fir Tree provides a more melancholy counterpart. Andersen's tree longs for future splendor and fails to value the present, whereas Dickens's tree gathers past, present, and future into one structure of memory. Reading the two works together illuminates contrasting uses of the Christmas tree as a symbol of desire, transience, recollection, and mortality. Louisa May Alcott's Little Women is a valuable companion for its treatment of Christmas, domestic economy, family solidarity, gender expectations, and moral generosity. Its opening Christmas scenes measure abundance not by possession alone, but by the willingness to give. Like Dickens, Alcott recognizes the home as both a shelter and a school of social values. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre connects with the haunted house material and the sociological concern with unequal power inside domestic institutions. Thornfield Hall, like Dickens's legendary mansions, contains concealed wrongdoing that returns through sound, fire, rumor, and disruptive revelation. Jane's position as a dependent woman also clarifies the vulnerability of figures such as the betrayed housekeeper with the rusty keys. Henry James's The Turn of the Screw offers a later and more psychologically ambiguous development of the country house ghost tradition. It shares Dickens' interest in children, servants, inherited spaces, uncertain testimony, and the social process by which supernatural narratives acquire credibility. James removes the reassuring framework of communal Christmas storytelling and leaves interpretation radically unstable. Washington Irving's The Sketchbook, particularly its Christmas essays and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, is relevant for its combination of seasonal custom, inherited folklore, hospitality, nostalgia, and comic supernaturalism. Irving and Dickens both convert remembered traditions into literary forms that create a sense of communal continuity, even while acknowledging that such traditions are selective reconstructions of the past. George MacDonald's At the Back of the North Wind can be read beside A Christmas Tree for its blending of child consciousness, fairy tale structures, social suffering, death, and spiritual consolation. MacDonald's fantasy repeatedly brings enchantment into contact with poverty and urban hardship, extending Dickens's conviction that imagination should deepen compassion rather than provide mere escape. Finally, Kenneth Grahame's The Golden Age offers a companion study of adult recollection and childhood imagination. Its narrators reinterpret domestic authority, books, games, and ordinary landscapes through the heightened logic of childhood. Like Dickens, Grahame understands that children inhabit a culture supplied by adults while continually transforming it into a freer and